Yeah, so I'm going to have two recordings and I'll send them both to you. Hopefully one of them will be fantastic.
Thanks, man. I'm sorry about this.
No worries at all. I don't care.
This is Britain at its best, once again.
Okay,
unable to do anything. Well, I'm very excited that my guest today on the Youthscape podcast is a old friend, which makes him sound like an old man. I don't mean it like that. I've started on the wrong foot immediately. A friend who's not old, but is wise.
I am old.
A friend who has been a friend for many years.
And is also old.
who is not as young as he was when I met him.
Oh, there you go.
But he's probably wiser now.
And definitely more gray.
And it is, of course, Mark Oestreicher. You may know him as MarkO. And he heads up the Youth Cartel over in the United States of America, which is a country just on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, if you don't know it. And very excited that you've decided to come and join me on the Youthscape podcast, MarkO. We have been friends for a long time. I'm not making that up, am I? We actually do know each other.
No, quite true. We have been together in multiple countries and many cities. We've attended events at Wembley, and we have spoken at each other's events. So many fond memories we share.
You make it sound like that's not true. We did go to Wembley together, didn't we? We went to see England, Switzerland.
Yeah, it was fun.
Do you remember which scarf you decided to wear in the middle of the England end?
Actually, I think if I remember right, this was a number of years ago, but I think I happened to have an Ireland scarf with me. Is that true?
You did. You wore your Ireland scarf, which I'm not sure.
Well, the truth is, it's just the only scarf I have.
You just have an Ireland scarf.
Yeah, I'm not a big scarf guy. I live in San Diego, California. You know, our worst day of the year, I have to like today I was sitting outside and I had to put on this little hoodie because it was just a little chilly outside. It was actually nice enough out that you would probably be great in shorts and a tank top and feel great. But for us, it's a chilly day. Just a little.
You have me down as a tank top wearer.
Well, it's a great look on you.
I think you're casting aspersions there. Well, look, I first got to know you about 14 years ago, maybe 13, 14 years ago, when you were the president of Youth Specialties.
Yeah. Boy, you said it with such import.
I did. And it's not to say what you're doing now isn't important too, but it was a very important job title. And you were in a very significant role in American youth ministry, weren't you? I mean, do you just want to explain for those that don't know what Youth Specialties is in a nutshell, you know, what that role involved?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, this is a big country with a lot of people and a lot of churches and a lot of youth workers, right? And there were certainly many organizations, still are, that serve youth workers, but Youth Specialties was one of very few that were the large national organizations. And for many years, the National Youth Workers Convention was kind of the place to be. During our peak years, that convention ran in 3 or 4 cities each fall and had 3,000 to 8,000 youth workers at each site. So there was a certain amount of scale to it that was a pretty big deal. For me, it really became more significant and weighty once the founder of Youth Specialties, Mike Yaconelli, died in a car accident. So it was kind of a shock to the American youth ministry world, and that changed my role dramatically in ways that were great, but certainly offered me the opportunity for some good lessons and some hard lessons. A lot of opportunity for growth, not all of it invited.
Yeah. And so that went well for a few years, didn't it?
Yeah.
And then came quite suddenly to an end.
This is true. Yes, as good things sometimes do.
And I remember that experience was incredibly challenging for you? I mean, I hope it's okay to talk about this. I feel like you've talked about this in public forums quite often before, but it was certainly a challenge to you. But do you want to just say a little bit about that process of moving on from youth specialties and the journey you had to go on before you then moved on to what came next, which is still going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess probably the best way to talk about it is how it impacted me at a personal level rather than what the logistics were. We had been purchased by a large Christian publisher and operated as a department of that publisher for a number of years, and that went well for a while. And then when the economy was in tough space in like 2008, we were really struggling financially as an organization, and they were too, and there was a lot of pressure. And eventually in 2009, that parent organization of ours decided to sell off youth specialties, but they decided to make me redundant, if I remember the term correctly, about 3 months or 2 months prior to the sale going through. And I think it was really the kind of corporate fear of the executives there that didn't understand that I would never do anything to harm the organization that I loved so much. They kind of just thought, hey, he's the leader, he needs to be out of the way. And so, but they couldn't go public with why I was being let go. And so it just was, it's hard to describe why it was so difficult. But there was shame involved, there was embarrassment, there was, of course, all kinds of rumors because the truth wasn't coming out. The simple truth was it was a business decision, had nothing to do with, any kind of failure or anything else at all. But it felt like all of that ugly stuff. And I've often compared it to, if we say that teenagers have three primary tasks, identity, which is answering the question, who am I? And autonomy, which is how do my choices matter? And affinity, which is like belonging, to whom and where do I belong? Well, when I lost my job, all of those I felt like I was 16 again, because I suddenly wasn't sure who I was. I wasn't sure how I had any agency or any ability to make decisions that influenced anything. And I wasn't sure where I belonged. I felt like I'd been cut off from the world where I found meaning. And it was a really lost time for me in a lot of ways, very dark. I think if I reflect back on what some of the major learning was, because honestly now, all these years later, and it probably only took about 3 years to get to this point, I'm so thankful for that pain. Like I would not change anything about it. I'm so thankful to God. Not that I think God did this to me, but I know that God was walking with me and bringing about good and redemptive things in my life that I would like to think are now bringing fruit in the kingdom for other people too. So I'm thankful for it. I feel like years earlier, I had been confronted by a dominant, arrogant streak that I had, and I had to really wrestle with that. But my end of my time at Youth Specialties and the maybe 6 or 12 months that followed that was a real breaking of my desire to try to control everything. And I couldn't control things, so it put me in a place where I had to choose: am I going to release control and allow God to work here? Am I going to be able to find a level of satisfaction in life around things that I'm not controlling? And that kind of opened me up to a new place in my own spiritual walk. I feel like it changed in many ways aspects of my personality. It made me a softer and more gentle person. I'm still a pretty driving person, but I'm not as dramatically type A as I used to be. And I'm thankful for that, because the work that I'm involved now in, if I feel like if I was still operating as the MarkO from 2006, I really wouldn't be as effective at what I'm doing now. And so it's all just that amazing part of what God's been doing in my life. I think you know this, Martin, but I discovered hope in that 12 months. And I discovered that I had a completely wrong understanding, I would say an American lie about what hope was, though it would be interesting for you to respond to that. I mean, I saw hope as synonymous with optimism, right? That it was just look at the glass as half full and look for the silver lining. And the Christian version of that is let go and let God, right? And that kind of bumper sticker theology didn't work for me in that time. And it was really kind of some experiences in that first 12 months that led me to this new understanding of hope and a discovery of hope that was more about truly believing, having confidence in God continuing to author a story, that it's not over yet, that there's awesome, redemptive, beautiful things still to come. And so, yeah, I'm so thankful for all of that stuff. I know people go through a lot more pain than I went through, so I'm not trying to build some kind of comparative thing or ask for pity. It really was just one of the harder things I've gone through, and now I'm nothing but thankful for it.
And that is beautiful. That is probably, as you describe it, quite an American understanding of Christian hope. I think the British understanding of Christian hope is much more realistic and even pessimistic. I think our version of Christian hope is it possible that we could still have half of these kids at the end of the year?
Yes. I think the British understanding of hope is, look, everything in life is horrible anyhow. Can we just scrape together a little positivity, right?
Yeah, if that. So then you, I feel like we're doing This Is Your Life here, but which is a show that won't make any sense to you at all, but very big in the UK about 20 years ago. The story isn't over there, because you then launched this thing called the Youth Cartel, which is, people when they hear that name for the first time probably have a little bit of a reaction to it, I would think.
Yeah, I hope so.
But well, exactly. And so what was that? And you sound like you're the crazy outsiders, which is kind of where Youth Specialties started. So was that what you do? You going back to those roots?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I wasn't there in the earliest days of Youth Specialties. It's been around for a lot longer than me, because it actually started in 1968. But I do think there's some of that same spirit. We want to stay small, the Youth Cartel. There's just 4 of us on staff. We not only want to stay small, we want to be able to serve all youth workers, but from a position where we're able to stir the pot, where we're able to, shoot some shots across the bow, where we can be, our tagline is instigating revolution in youth ministry. We want to be upsetters. So it's not just about being nasty or pushing for change for the sake of change, but I personally have this passion to see the church become who God dreamed the church could be, who Jesus intended the church to be. And that begs for change. So when I look back at least the church in America, and I think this is true in the UK also, so much of the best change over the last hundreds of years has often been fueled by movements from youth. And so I want to foment change in the Church of Jesus Christ through the ministry done with youth. And I see it happening on a regular basis, which is super encouraging to me.
Yeah, we've been watching news reports from the US recently of young people demonstrating, literally demonstrating, but showing that they are the future, that they are going to shape their own future by revolution. It's been incredibly inspiring to see the March for Our Lives stuff and the response to the various ongoing high school massacres that you've had over many years.
Yeah, that's very, very encouraging. I think a lot of it, Martin, comes down to a question that I ask a lot these days, and I've written this in books and said it other places, so it's not like this is the first time I've ever said this, but for me, this question that I'd love every church to be asking, but even youth workers need to be asking this. Do I see teenagers as a problem to be solved or as a wonder to behold? And even though you and I and our fellow youth workers listening to this podcast might assume, oh, well, of course, I'm pro-teenager. I love teenagers. I love youth. So of course I would say wonder to behold. I would suggest that even a large percentage of people who are vocationally involved in youth work are still problem to be solved perspective people. And if you have a problem to be solved perspective, which I would say 95 to 99% of our American culture has that, including the majority of our churches, then you look at things, even like the research that's come out in the last few years about the underdevelopment of the prefrontal cortex and how teenagers have a hard time making good decisions. Well, you look at that then and you say, see, they're broken and they're incapable and we should isolate them more and treat them as if they were children. But if you have a wonder to behold perspective, then you are asking questions, what might the beautiful creation intention have been for why teenagers are this way? And how can that be a gift both to them and to our churches and to our world? And I think we need to be applying that. When I look at the kids in the marches that have taken place recently, if you look at that with a problem to be solved perspective, you see, oh man, these kids, they're just causing problems and they're idealistic and there's really nothing, or at the most you might think in kind of a patronizing way, kind of a pat on the back, oh, that's so sweet, look at them, it really won't make a difference, right? But if you look at it, the reason I was thinking of it was your hopeful words, if you look at it with that wonder to behold, look at these kids can really change the world, right? God can use them in significant and powerful ways, whether you agree with that political agenda or not.
What I loved about that section of the podcast was that you carried on brilliantly whilst all sorts of things were happening behind me. It was like a West End farce. I've no idea whether it'll have picked up on the recording.
You should. I think it would be nice for the listeners to maybe back up and just listen if they heard a dog whine in there, because that was hard for me to carry on through that.
You kept going though. I could see the look on your face. You were desperate to.
Dude, we could have made it through. You didn't have to call it out.
You have to tell people that. Appreciate it. But I can tell you right now, Rachel Gardner will be just loving the whole wonder to behold thing. She will be raving about that. I can tell you right now, that's what we're going to talk about in the little post-interview chat later on.
Awesome.
I mean, there's so much there, beautiful stuff. And you are somebody who maybe offers a little bit of a prophetic voice into American youth ministry, and I think probably the world beyond that. You do take some sort of sorry, let me start that again. You're somebody, I think, who reads a bit more widely, who thinks a bit more sort of psychologically about what's going in a young person. You know, you kind of bring those influences to your thinking about youth ministry. You don't have like a secret degree in like child psychology or something, do you?
I do not. I have a master's degree in curriculum development, which counts for something.
But it does, but it's not really related to that.
But definitely it's been much more about reading and pursuing the stuff that I'm intrigued by. I do think I'm a curious person, and that could be interpreted in more ways than one.
I was already interpreting it in at least two ways.
And both accurate.
So the Youth Cartel is a resource publisher, but it's also a bit more to it than that.
Yes.
And one of the most interesting, we'll talk particularly about one of the books before the end, but one thing I really wanted you to unpack is this kind of cohort model that you've developed, and it is your model, isn't it? So others may have done similar things, but you guys have been doing this for a few years. And so you get groups of youth leaders together in a place, probably because of geography or not necessarily. And then you kind of spend time with them and you go on a journey with them as a group. So do you want to just talk a bit about how that works?
Yeah, having been part of youth ministry training events for so many years, there's a time and a place for a once a year convention, like the wonderful event that you guys are hosting, like the ones that I was part of for so many years at Youth Specialties. That's great. Those are particularly helpful, I think, when you're a newer youth worker and you need skill training. But what I found was that people who had been in youth ministry for more years, and I think there's a little healthy movement on this in the UK, but there's been a lot of movement in the United States of youth workers with longevity. Like one of my cohorts of 10 youth workers right now has 5 people in it that all have 25 or more years of experience in youth ministry.
Wow.
That's an extreme end of the continuum, but there's more and more of that. And those people, I'd say as soon as they get past about 5 years, they start looking for something deeper. And so what we put together is a year-long youth worker development program that's really more of a focus on the growth and health of the youth worker and on leadership development, leading from values, learning how to lead change, things like that. Skills and thinking that would be helpful whether or not you stay in youth ministry. I started this, actually, it's what kind of gave birth to the Youth Cartel, because I started the youth ministry coaching program first. Yeah, so it's 10 people in a cohort. We found that it's so much more productive to be in a group process learning together rather than me being expected to be the expert who can speak into everyone's lives. And we go on this year-long learning adventure together. Most of our cohorts meet 6 times for 2 days. So we meet every other month for 2 days. And it's a variety of training and dialogue and personal sharing and problem solving and a whole bunch of different things. We do about 10 cohorts a year. So we have about 100 people in the program at any given time. And they are all over the United States. And some of them are regional. And some are more focused on a topic. For example, I'm sure you've heard of multi-site churches, and there's some of those now in the UK too, of course. It's been such a fast-growing movement, and we found that youth workers they're never in the driver's seat of why a church decides to go multi-site, so they're always responding to this changing need. So we have a cohort just for those youth workers. It happens to meet in Southern California, but the youth workers are coming in from all over the country for that, whereas other ones are much more regional.
And I feel like an evangelical question brimming within me here, or certainly a jargon question, which is what do you find is the fruit of meeting like this? At the end of that time, what is the difference that is made by this model?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm reluctant to because it sounds like I'm overselling it. But I've just never been a part of something that's so transformative. I got a card in the mail this last week from a woman who had just recently graduated from the program, and she sent me a nice batch of cookies, as we would say. Is that biscuits?
No, that's one of those awful words that's infiltrated our language now. Now we say cookies as well quite a lot.
Is there a difference between biscuits and cookies?
Yes, there are. Cookies are a type of biscuit.
Oh,
biscuits are all biscuits.
Got it.
Whereas cookies are those kind of round biscuits that have the chips, like chocolate chips or nuts.
I am almost through all seasons of the Great British Baking Show right now, and there are episodes given just to biscuits, but I've never seen one given to cookies. So anyhow, that was a sidebar. A lovely one, though. She wrote me this card that said, I was completely lost, and this program gave me my life back. I've rediscovered who I am. I've rediscovered God's love for me. I've reignited my calling and my passion for youth work, and I have nothing but the work of God through this program to thank for that. Now, that kind of a result is what we see from the vast majority of the people who go through this. It's truly transformative. So it's much more than a learning thing or going to take a course on adolescent psychology or something. It's about growing in self-knowledge, growing in self-awareness and the depth of thinking. And that cohort model is part of what provides for that. It's a honest and vulnerable but supportive cooperative learning experience. Yeah.
So you know, the question is, would that translate to the UK context? You know, I think you have a pretty good handle on things here, better than most. Do you think it would work here? One of the things I would think we would struggle with is we struggle to pay for things in the UK. So
right.
You know, there's a cost involved to running this sort of intensive, isn't there?
Yeah.
But apart from that, do you think this would translate to the UK culture?
I think it would absolutely translate. I'm sure there would be modifications to be made in some aspects. And certainly, again, part of the strength of the cohort approach is that it's not reliant exclusively on the lead coach, which in most cases is me, though we have some other people doing it too, because the group ends up making it a collaborative learning experience. So it gets customized by participation of the people in it. So yeah, I mean, we did one in Canada and it worked great. And we've talked about quite a few other contexts. So I'm sure, oh, that's lovely.
Wait a minute, what's this?
That was an incoming phone call. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm quite confident that it would work very well. Cost is, of course, an issue, and churches in the United States often have more funds allocated to youth ministry, and youth workers, because of the value of youth ministry here and the longevity, youth workers often have the ability to pursue this on their own in some way, a little bit more. I apologize.
That's all right.
So, yeah, I think so.
Right. It's all right. The great thing is we can edit this. We can do.
I just turned it off.
Right, perfect. We can edit that out. That's fine. We may leave the dog in.
I think we should. That was fun. Yes.
We'll take the iPhone out. So I'm going to change direction for the last bit. So the final thing I wanted to talk to you about was your publishing, and particularly one book which has just been released and is available in. I think you can order it in the UK, and it's looking at the subject of how we, as youth ministry, as youth ministers, respond to LGBT young people. And I would say if there's one subject which has really tied us up in knots in this country, and I know certainly in your country, in the church in the last decade, it's been this one. And we are, I would say, in many cases, scared to even have conversations about it. Mm-hmm. The wonderful thing about the book, which I'd love you to just talk about for a moment, is that it models good conversation around this subject.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not saying issue. I've learned the lesson at last. But this is a really important book, not just because of the content, but because of the very approach of the book itself. So do you want to talk about it a bit?
Yeah, sure. It's called 4 Views on Pastoring LGBTQ Teenagers. And we had decided about a year and a half ago that we wanted to develop a kind of a subline of books that were along a 4 Views perspective. But what's mostly been done in Christian publishing with those kinds of books has been theological debates. And we felt like what was really needed by youth workers was something more pragmatic. They could find the theological debates elsewhere. We also knew this was the first topic we needed to address in this line. The second one in this line we're working on right now is 4 Views on talking to teenagers about sex. So those are the kinds of things we'll continue to address. But with this, we knew it had to be the first book out of the gate, because here, too, it's just a regular conversation. Entire denominations are on the precipice of splitting over this. And in all of our coaching groups, often when the Youth Cartel decides to publish something, it's because the subject comes up so often in our coaching program. This always comes up. Every cohort has at some point in it, usually multiple points, youth workers saying, I don't know what to do. I'm not sure, even if I'm in the same place exactly theologically as my church, and that's part of the tension. I feel like whatever I do or say with a teenager who's coming out to me or whatever it is, has questions, that I might get in trouble for it. And I also don't want to make the problem worse with kids. So how can I be faithful to my calling and do the right thing? I don't know what the right thing is. So yeah, we intentionally found 4 writers, 4 contributors who are in the trenches youth workers, not just theoreticians or theologians, and had pragmatic experience of working with gay teenagers or same-sex attracted teenagers, and could kind of lay out what's their pragmatic approach. Of course, they're all rooted in theology, but it's not a theological debate. And we tried to find them with differentiation. One, of course, as you know, Martin, is one of our 4 is a British person. So this book is 1/4 British already. And Gemma was a wonderful contributor and great to work with. So yeah, we had a wide variety of responses, but they were respectful to one another. So it's a really healthy dialogue. Each one of them responded to one of the other chapters too. And yeah, it's been received very well. People are finding it to be very helpful.
What I think is brilliant about the book is that wherever you are on this series of questions, you probably will find your voice or your starting point represented within the book. So
that's almost true. That's almost true, because and I functioned as the general editor on the book. I wrote the introduction, I picked the writers, and I wrote one of the appendices. There was a perspective that I refused to have in the book. I will be honest with you. I refused to have the perspective. I refused to have anybody that said that the answer is love the sin or hate the sin. And interestingly enough, all 4 of the contributors, in developing their own chapters on their own, all 4 of them talked about, even our most conservative guy talked about why that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so what I wasn't willing to have in the book is a response that says, we just need to tell kids, hey, Jesus wants you, but you've got to know where we stand, because that ultimately doesn't work. And so that perspective is not in there. There is one guy who is obviously the conservative voice.
Yeah.
But he writes his perspective in a way that even somebody who's a little more progressive would feel comfortable and feel like he has a very valid, has valid things to say that are helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a brilliant book. It's a brilliant thing that you've done it. I think it's brilliant that you have taken the risk of doing it, because there is some exposure to you as an individual, but also as an organization, by sticking your head above the parapet and publishing. I think so often we are frozen by the fear that even having these conversations will create a storm and get us into trouble with one group or another. And I think it's brilliant.
I wonder if you'd like to know maybe what a couple of the commonalities were. Because this is, again, what I feel like I've been a little more armed for the questions youth workers have for me because of the development of this book. So when youth workers ask me, well, what's the one thing I need to know? What do I say? And some of the things that I gleaned from the working on this book, it takes tremendous courage for a teenager who is wondering about their sexuality to come to you as a youth worker, whether you're employed by the church or if you're a volunteer. It takes tremendous courage for them, because most of them already assume I'm going to experience rejection.
Yeah.
And so for them to say to you, I need to talk to you, I'm wondering about this, the first thing we need to do is to affirm their courage. Thank you for trusting trusting me with this. It took tremendous courage on your part to share that with me. And I want to honor that. The second thing that's so critical is no matter what your theological posture, it's critical that we tell teenagers, Jesus loves you and I love you and we want you here. So we want you to be part of our ministry. Wherever you're at in this process, we want to walk with you. And a conservative can say that, and a progressive can say that. And nothing else we might say matters until we can authentically say those things first. Most teenagers who are struggling with same-sex attraction need to hear that over and over again, because their assumption is, I'm going to experience rejection because of this.
Do you feel hopeful, MarkO, on this whole subject, that we are going to get there, that we are going to just get past that sort of gridlock that I described, of not quite knowing how to love all young people equally? Yeah. Do you feel hopeful that we're going to move past that phase?
I feel tremendously hopeful. If you would think for a moment, all of you listening right now, think for a moment about how much this conversation has changed in the last 5 or 10 years. It's mind-blowing. It has changed so fast. The fact that you and I are talking about how can we love teenagers in the midst of this struggle would not have been the question that all of us, evangelicals, progressives, people more conservative than evangelicals, we would not have all been having this conversation 5 or 10 years ago. Only a few people would have. So it's changed fast. It's continuing to change. And I'm very hopeful that things are going to continue to change and the church will become more a safe place for all people in the years to come.
Awesome. MarkO, thank you so much for your time. If people want to check out some of these resources and find out a bit more about Youth Cartel, where do they go?
Well, the youthcartel.com. That book, most of our books are not available in the UK, and I'm sorry to say that. We've talked about doing something with Youthscape if they'd ever get their act together. That book, though, is available, and I can't remember what it is, but it is available there somewhere. And that's one of our books that we've made available on Kindle. So that's available via Kindle in the UK also.
Okay, so it's theyouthcartel.com. MarkO, you are a legend, and many people will have loved reading your columns over many years in Youth Work magazine as well, and whatever it's called these days, Youth
and Children's Work.
Youth and Children's Work. Yeah, I should know that really.
It's actually called Premier Youth and Children's Work.
Yes, because it's the best one. That's why.
Exactly.
So I thank you on behalf of the entire British youth ministry community for all of that. And we hope we'll see you on these shores soon.
So do I. I am long overdue for a trip to the motherland.
We'll coordinate a Wembley visit and we'll get you to see some truly shocking football.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, great to speak to you.
Thanks. Okay, stop.